Yeah, we have all our moderator and panelists here for the session. Just as a logistics issue, we'll be recording. So just wanted to keep you all informed that this session is recorded. Now I would like to hand it over to our faculty, Gaurav Chiplonkar, to take the session forward.
Thanks, Chaitali, and hi everyone. Good morning, afternoon, evening, wherever you are in the world right now. Great to have a wonderful panel. And before I start, let me just introduce our panelists to everyone. So starting with Sumit Gupta. So Sumit has, as a part of the initial startup team, Sumit is instrumental in establishing the commercial banking business at Yes Bank. And over the years, he's been actively involved in scaling up and consolidating the SME and the mid-market business for the bank, and is especially responsible for setting up and scaling the rural businesses while creating strong systems and processes to yield higher productivity and efficient risk management. So he's been a strong advocate for agri-businesses and supply chain finance, which is now, as we know, especially after the pandemic, quite key to various aspects of the Indian economy. And he's managed a sales and marketing role for over 16 years in various leadership positions, and now is responsible for managing the overall risk function of the bank and the central data analytics group. And as we know, I mean, again, risk is something that I want to touch upon as we go along in a country like India. And prior to joining Yes Bank, Sumit was an associate director with Rabo India and has had over 28 years of experience in various capacities in organizations like Standard Chartered Bank, CRISIL, Maruti Suzuki, etc. And he holds an IIM Calcutta MBA and is an IITian from Delhi. So thank you so much, Sumit, for joining us today.
Thank you, Gaurav.
And moving to our other panelist, Rishi Jaitley, who is the founder and CEO of TimesBridge, which is America's largest investments and partnerships firm. That brings the best ideas to India and Asia. And the firm's portfolio includes Airbnb, Coursera, Headspace, Uber, and a lot of other companies who they have brought to India. And Rishi was the former vice president of Asia Pacific and Middle East and North Africa for Twitter, and earlier was the managing director of Twitter India, and the head of public-private partnerships for Google and YouTube in India as well. He was actually a speechwriter for Google CEO Eric Schmidt and director of the Knight Foundation in Detroit and College Summit in Washington, D.C. Apart from his illustrious industrial career in the industry, he's also the co-founder of a lot of other firms, which include Kiva Detroit, which is America's first peer-to-peer micro-lending initiative, and BME Community, which is America's largest digital storytelling network by and for Black males who lead in their hometowns. He is a trustee of Princeton University, a former commissioner of higher education in New Jersey, and a member of the Princeton Technology Advisory Council. He holds a bachelor's degree in history and certificate in American studies from Princeton, and lives in Charlottesville, Virginia with his family. So thanks so much for agreeing to speak here, Rishi. Great to have you.
Thanks, Gaurav. Great to be here.
And finally, we have our very old alumni, Naresh Kumra. So Naresh is an investor advisor to entrepreneurs in Asia and has been since 2006 through La Rochelle Ventures Limited, an investment firm that he founded in 2012. Kumra has become an angel investor in Asia-based companies that target global markets with the goal to help young entrepreneurs scale up their businesses and achieve their dreams. In 2013, Naresh joined JMATK and is currently based in Hong Kong and works in consumer products. So Naresh has spent 6 years with McKinsey and Company in the New York area before moving to Hong Kong, and started his career way back with Schlumberger's electronic businesses, and has had several positions in France and India over his career. Naresh is also an IITian from Delhi and is our alumnus from the Darden Business School. So thank you so much, Naresh, for being here. Great to have you.
Thank you for having me, Gaurav. Pleasure.
So great. So let me get started straight away. And just so that in the audience, just to give, I think everyone who's been plugged into the Indian news circuit doesn't need an introduction to Make in India, but for the people who are joining us from outside India, this was one of the pet projects that the Prime Minister of India launched in 2014. To encourage companies to develop, manufacture, and assemble products in India. So talking about the supply chain, talking about manufacturing in India. And it was incentivized dedicated investments into manufacturing. And so the policy approach was essentially to create a conducive environment for investments and to develop infrastructure, technology, and open up the sectors for foreign capital. And after it's launched, in fact, India became one of the the largest FDI inflows that happened in 2015 across the world, and overcoming US and China while this happened. And so it has, as we all know, India has jumped on ease of doing business ranks and other like the global economic forums, competitive index, and so on and so forth. So what I hope to understand today is what are the different facets of the Make in India, and it's been 6 or 7 years since it has been launched. So let me start with you, Naresh, because you have been working in the manufacturing sector for a long time. So just wanted to get a sense from you on what do you think about the Make in India policy, and how has it actually transformed Indian manufacturing, in your opinion?
So, my experience with the manufacturing goes back to, I've had 3 different stints. The first one was in the 90s, right after liberalization. We started manufacturing in India, and that time you had to manufacture in India because it was an imperative if you wanted to do business in India. So it was focused on the India market. Exports was not that much of a focus. It was a necessity because of the tariffs. My second stint in India for manufacturing was in the 2000s, before the more recent Make in India sort of program took shape. And at that time, you had to be in India because India was already doing great in terms of GDP growth. You wanted to be competitive. The world was coming there. Tariffs were coming down. But it was just, if you wanted to respond to the local market, you had to be close to the customer. And the exports had started to also begin after the IT boom. My third stint of manufacturing in India coincided with the Make in India program. And I have to say, I've seen a major change, but there's a lot still to happen, right? And I think some of the biggest changes in my mind, although there's been a lot of noise against it, I think GST has been a game changer, right? Because one of the biggest issues was that you cannot be a productive, efficient manufacturer if you don't have scale. And pre-GST, you could only really service the local market you were in, the state you were in. It was much harder to do business across states, right? So you tended to see smaller companies, smaller factories, and it was replicated across different states. With GST, now a factory wherever in the world, wherever in the country, can now access the national market. So for the first time, the power of population in India actually is real, because now the whole of India is a market. Previously, it was only on paper. So I think that's a big game changer. There are a number of other reforms which are in the process, and actually I think Sumit, you and Rishi might be able to actually comment even better on this. But from the other side, from a manufacturer standpoint, I see that what's planned in terms of land reforms is huge. What's planned in terms of the labor laws is huge. And I think also, more around capital access. I think these 3 things still are a bit of an impediment. I think there are good ideas in the roadmap. There's good effort on the way, but it's not there yet, right? So I'm way more optimistic today about India manufacturing than I've ever been in my 30-some year career dealing with manufacturing in India.
So just to follow up on that, Naresh, I mean, one of the things, for example, at Darden or in macroeconomics, we teach people in economics about comparative advantage and stories about the fact that really India's advantage, so to say, is in low and medium skilled labor. And so manufacturing should have been the place where we really had a comparative advantage. But India is, as we know, exported high skilled services for whatever reason. Right. And so jump-starting manufacturing has been a challenge since liberalization in 91, and it continues to be a challenge even after Make in India. I mean, it's not that manufacturing shares as a proportion of GDP have really boomed after Make in India. So just wanted to get a sense from you on, in your opinion, like, is manufacturing jump-starting that entire sector even going to be possible, or should we be investing resources there in terms of a comparative advantage theory or in terms of just the future of the country?
Great question. I think first, manufacturing, making it bigger in India is an imperative. I think to service the market we have internally and to employ hundreds of millions of youth in our country, we don't have a choice, but we have to make manufacturing work. So it's an imperative. We cannot be just a service economy. So I think that's one. I think second is that we had a number of impediments. I mean, some of them I touched on, right? Productivity. So I remember the first time I did a technology transfer project back in '93. We were moving technology from France to India. Think about France, India in terms of labor costs. But once you take productivity into account and all of the other sort of elements that touch the cost of a landed product in terms of, for example, logistics, right? Handling, taking products out of the factory onto a truck, taking products out of a truck, into a warehouse, taking off the warehouse on a boat, whatever. There are a number of touch points that you have. When you take all of that into account, actually, believe it or not, the cost of landed product was cheaper from France, despite in those days, I don't even remember, maybe 20 or 30x difference in the labor cost, right? So it's not just the labor cost, the productivity of the whole system was really, really bad back in those days. I think it's come up a lot, right? Scale has a big part to it, right? Taking out some of the inefficiencies, some of which I alluded to earlier, I think is a big part of it, right? But there's so much more has to be done, right? Now, I think in terms of the comparative, sort of study, I think given even before the wave around moving out of China started in more recent years with the US-China trade war and the narrative around the world actually around that. I think even before that, companies, large corporations in the West had already started working on China plus one strategy at a minimum, right? And some had gone as far as back to saying, let's do reshoring. So I remember back in the mid 2000s when I was Asia CEO for a New York Stock Exchange company, we did a manufacturing study, and back then, I mean, there was no conversation yet about anti-China or anything like that. But we said, it just makes more sense given how the labor costs in China are going up and how it's becoming more expensive to move products from there, and the long supply chain, which means a lot more working capital stuck in your supply chain, right? So it just makes more sense to have some manufacturing near-shored at a minimum, if not reshored, right? So I think you have that factor which is helping. So India is the only other market that can be that can provide the large capacity that is needed, right? But there's a lot more way to go before I think it becomes comparable to the productivity that China has.
So talking about productivity, I just wanted to get Sumit's thought on this. Sumit, you've been working on this from the finance perspective, and you have been working with small and medium enterprises as well as now also with the large firms. So you've really seen the spectrum of Indian manufacturing, so to say. And I think, so two things that really always have I always think about, which is that why does India have a huge manufacturing, like an SME sector? Like, why are firms not becoming larger in India? What are the impediments? And finance seems to be one of the, so is it an interaction of finance with all of these other factors that you can't do anything about? Or in your experience, like what have been the financial constraints and your role at Yes Bank in building up this sector? So just wanted you to touch upon, the SMEs and the agrarian side of this.
So look, thanks Gaurav for the opportunity, and couldn't agree more with Naresh. He has had a first-hand experience in building the whole thing up. So let's take a couple of items. Actually, a lot of the stuff that Naresh mentioned, it's important to dissect that, and that's where lies all the answers. Naresh mentioned about the cost of landed product being cheaper than from France imports than manufacturing in India. Let's look at it, and what is it that we are doing right now about it? One, the entire logistics is a lot to do currently is the road network. Road network, the efficiency of the whole thing and the likes of it, which adds a couple of points in terms of productivity losses. With GST, which has been launched, the turnaround time for vehicles has actually been reduced by in pockets of more than 50%. That means the productivity of the same vehicle has gone up to 2x. Now that will start to reflect in the productivity in terms of the sheer cost, number one. Number two, power availability. That has undergone a sea change from being a absolutely short economy. Today, you are absolutely fully adequate economy in terms of power supply availability and the requisite, transmission networks and the likes of it, with a healthy mix between renewable and non-renewable and the likes of it. That's the second. Between these two components, there's a huge gains which have been on the table to try and address some of the pain points. So let's come back as to why is it that companies don't want to grow. So I think there are pockets where the SMEs are in abundance. There are pockets where manufacturing has not been a very great one. So everything goes back. Every economy evolves over decades, right? So we also had a license clash, let's say in 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, right? Where everything was licensed, everything, and because they were licensed and hence they were multiple units by the same guy under different names, and hence became the story of SMEs to spawn. And with that being the case, and information asymmetry, both in terms of availability from a business standpoint as well as from a tax administration standpoint, there were enough and more reasons and incentives, or quote unquote, for people to try and make sure that they are finding ways to be creative at financing and dodging. Now, a whole lot of that is now getting fixed with the digitization of information. Tons of projects which are being administered, executed. It's not like future tense, right? It's past perfect. And they have been executed, which means that the amount of information availability is par excellence. All of that is now translating into zeal for people who are wanting to migrate to a newer form of growth, into tangibility, into looking at scale. So with the same with GST coming in, there are two clearly, you have this K type of recovery, right? Where people keep talking about the K-shaped recovery nowadays. Exactly, I would use the same analogy. In the post GST, also there was a K-shaped behavior in the SMEs. There were some guys who took the gauntlet, moved up the value chain, took up the challenge of creating a black economy into numbered books accounts and started to grow. And there were yet another set of people who said, this is not how we should be. Why should we be paying taxes? Gradually, they're facing the music. So you will find both kinds of sets, and to the extent that people moved up the GST, all of them, not all of them, a lot of them actually became a part of the organized supply chains. Because when till the time that you were not getting an offset and onset kind of from tax administration, everything was fine. But when you started to get offset or multiple stages, suddenly you wanted to have GST compliant vendors. So that actually, if you look at the entire pandemic as well, most of the supply chain participants have actually been not that worse off in the SME space. It is only the non-supply chain participants which have actually got impacted, although there were enough and more support extended by the government from a policy standpoint, from a variety of schemes to make sure that people are able to protect their businesses, people are able to support the livelihoods. If I look at the outcome, which is as of 2 years from in the 2-year period from pandemic, I think MSME has shown huge amount of resilience. The amount of slippages is not even a patch what it would have been. And you can see that in terms of cash flows. It's not just about balance sheet numbers.
Yeah, so Sumit, if I can ask you also, because you work on risk as well, I mean, as a chief risk officer, and one of the worries that people have had with lending in India has been the fact that, it's a very risky, I mean, we all know non-performing assets, whether it's in large companies or even the public sector and so on and so forth. So how do you view putting all of that together in terms of increasing, do you feel that, what's the future there in terms of managing risk in just the loans and non-performing assets in the country?
So Gaurav, if one has to manage these businesses at scale, it's important to leverage data. Mm-hmm. And with the availability of, and the government honestly has been very, very pragmatic. The amount of government bodies which are offering APIs to banks to extract real-time data accessible from the Labour Office of EPFOs, or there are a couple of other tax networks, that is something which has changed the landscape dramatically. And that itself has spawned a huge, large industry which is creating efficiencies, pushing the barriers big time. The entire fintech boom. I mean, Bombay used to be the Makkah for Mumbai used to be the Makkah for, let's say, financial capital of the country, right? It's arguable whether Mumbai is the Makkah or actually Bangalore is the Makkah today. Because Bangalore is creating so much of disruption that Mumbai today has no option but to toe the line. So all the business processes of the financial institutions are getting disrupted. And all of that is getting more and more sharper in terms of what you can do with the data, data-led decisioning, data-led origination. So, to coming back to exactly your point, Gaurav, I think the amount of whichever institutions are deploying data analytics as their primary tool to track. I mean, this is taking away individual dependencies. Sure enough, human intelligence, you can't kill human intelligence, but to create filtering and to use ML and AI, which is no longer a buzzword, right? They're being deployed in real live environment to try and make sure that we are able to predict the possible potential stress cases and use advanced collection teams to be able to follow up with the customers and likes of it. Which is why today the delinquency numbers or the loss numbers in the in the portfolios are meaningfully lesser. Actually, the entire noise that you see around is a lot to do with some of the very large groups going belly up, and both from fraud and delinquencies and the likes of it. If you were to look at it, chef around the data, and you'll figure out that the SME is not. I mean, I would any day put my money on SME lending. I mean, that's been a very, very good lending domain.
I see. So talking about like technology, I mean, we have Rishi with us as well. So Rishi, just wanted to get your thoughts. You happen to be, in my opinion, at the right place at the right time in terms of like, this transformational growth story of just how technology was leveraged, exactly as Sumit was saying. So just wanted to get your thoughts on what do you see, like what has been your experience or your story in terms of understanding how technology, how it came into India, how it was used by different aspects of the Indian economy, and where you see this going in the coming years?
Great. Thanks for having me, Gaurav. And a disclaimer, I'm not a manufacturer, nor do I have experience in that space. But, I guess a few reflections. I mean, reflection number one would be one way to, of course, think about Make in India is sort of at a technical level and assessing the state of manufacturing. Another way to think about Make in India is sort of as a spirit and a culture that has sort of, I've observed at least in India in the last decade or so, which is to say that aside from sort of the technical, tactical outcomes of public policy, there's absolutely a culture in the market now, particularly amongst entrepreneurs, that, in a market that, at least in my industry, has been a Google, Facebook market for a long time, basically, from a digital media standpoint. It's been so encouraging and exciting to see entrepreneurs self-aware of their own agency and their own ability to create. And why can't the leading digital platform in X category or Y category or Z category be an Indian company? Now, the irony, of course, is that I've spent a lot of the last 6 years, a lot of the last 20 years, helping global companies navigate the Indian market with energy and empathy. And I guess the way I think about that as an American who sort of lived in India a couple of times is India is better when the world's best are in India too. And I think what's really interesting about the Make in India story, the Make in India policy, is that it's not a closed door story. It's a story that certainly aims at cultivating domestic competencies and domestic muscle, but aspirationally it's trying to open the door wider actually to the world, which is really interesting. And I think what's underneath that is this recognition that everybody innovates harder and with more empathy and energy when you have the world's leading folks in X, Y, and Z category there. And so from if I were to sort of generalize what I've observed to kind of answer your question more directly, Gaurav, in the digital media space where I've spent most of my time, the Indian consumer I've always observed is open to global brands, global products, and that's why you've had there's probably a longer conversation about the porous nature of India over millennia, right? What is it about the Indian consumer that sort of has led to an inherent cosmopolitanism such that they're willing to turn YouTube into default search in the Indian market, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But what's exciting is that's now coexisting with an embrace of local products as well, specifically. So I guess my take on Make in India and this topic is going to be a little bit more bottoms up than top down. And I think it would be important not to miss that too, that there's a lot policy doesn't capture, and policy sets a tone. And it's that tone that I've observed in the market. And obviously many entrepreneurs have spent a lot of the last number of years, Indian entrepreneurs, talking to the government about what more they might do to cultivate opportunities for them to flourish and succeed. So let me stop there and see where you want to take it.
Yeah, so let me pick up on two things that you said. One was, I think, trying to understand the changing Indian consumer in terms of access to digital services. I mean, we've all heard the story of Jio and all of these smartphones being very cheap, data plans in India becoming very cheap, such that now everyone can afford, in some sense, to get plugged into the internet. And so in my limited understanding, there have been two effects of this, right? Like one is democratizing these services. Like, for example, the huge uptake of Instagram, Twitter, like now policies are announced on Twitter, for example, right? And people have been debating on Twitter. And so in some sense, it's democratized the voice. It's no longer in the hands of the few. But on the other hand, it has also exacerbated, the inequality, because in some sense, like, I agree that the urban consumer has become very cosmopolitan and aware of these brands, but if you still go to where most of India lives, which is in the villages and the small towns of the country, do you think, like, both from the equality in terms of democratizing these services and access to the internet, but also in terms of how unequal they are in terms of financial literacy, in terms of digital literacy, in terms of gender, in terms of other aspects like caste that play a huge role in many of these things? So just wanted to get your sense on how these have played out over the last decade in India.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I would challenge that a little bit. What I've observed, particularly since the inflection point of late 2016 Geo, is just the rapid rise of the non-English internet in India. And of course, Sumit in the market and Naresh nearby can speak with more rigor about it. But, India's, I don't remember the last count, but 600, 700 million internet users or so, and rapidly rising. So I observe in India where so many homegrown, local built products, and obviously the government has taken a strong position in the last year or two around products from China. And so as a result, you look at the ban of TikTok, right? The ban of TikTok in India led to the rise of homegrown short form video apps. There was just an acquisition or a merger announced yesterday between MX Takatak and the ShareChat's short form video player. Two Indian companies coming together, and I think they do something like 350 million users a month. They're not all in big cities. These are folks all around the Indian market. And I think what's really been fun about the last 20 years of leaning into India, it used to be the case, and this is really the premise of the business I run, Times Bridge. It used to be the case that the global executive would come to India and see India really as just one big top of the funnel market, right? You're telling a global story. India is really a nice top of the funnel story. You come Bombay, Delhi, press release, brand ambassador, you generate some top of the funnel buzz, your shareholders and the public markets like it. What's really fun is that many global companies and Indian companies, of course, are seeing and observing the market three-dimensionally, meaning India isn't just a customer and audience market. It isn't just a revenue market. It's also an innovation market. I've spent a lot of time with Dara, the chairman and CEO of Uber, and he describes India as a market, of course, that's a rides market for the business. Of course, it's a revenue market for the business, but it's also a transportation innovation market for the business, right? If you think about Make in India, Uber in Hyderabad is making global mapping, its entire global mapping product innovation scheme is built in India for the world. What I tell people when I host folks in India is that if you can figure out product market fit in India and learn how to ensure your product survives and thrives on the complicated network and mobile conditions in India, you can figure it out in Southeast Asia and East Africa and all. And so I observe a lot of companies seeing India far more three-dimensionally than before. Coursera, another example. Coursera, they built and launched their university business, their enterprise business in India. That's where their CEO came to launch global businesses. And so it's not just a fly-by destination, it's a make for the world hub. And it's been fun to see that. And to some extent, of course, it's been informed by public policy decisions. But I think a lot of the wave that's being ridden is kind of a bottoms up wave, which has been really fun to be a part of.
And so, yeah, so I mean, and Sumit and Naresh, feel free to jump in at any point if there are things. But I wanted to also, from technology and all the bottom-up approach, but still, like, for example, a question from the audience, Darshan was asking is basically, we're talking a lot about the government sector and privatizing the public utilities, for example. And so while we look at Make in India from just new growth in terms of startups, but there are existing firms who are arguably inefficiently manufacturing with low productivity and so on and so forth. So wanted to get your sense on what's the right way to go in that sense, right? So you can promote new firms, or you can make existing firms, and finance might be one part of it, or even your state-owned enterprises, privatizing some of them. So what is your sense on that in terms of trying to have this two-pronged approach?
So let me just answer that on that one, Gaurav. So let me take a cue from what Rishi just mentioned, right? Over the last 7 years in particular, this Make in India, call it fever, call it momentum, call it in the face all across media or everywhere. You call it events and conferences which are happening around the Make in India. That has actually spawned a desire for people to get back into manufacturing or start entrepreneurial ventures, manufacturing, not just services. One of the reasons, the point that you made while you were mid opening remarks, Gaurav, was why did India move straight from agrarian straight to services, or part from some manufacturing to services? Part of that was all the bottlenecks which were there in the manufacturing setup. Labor laws, Naresh mentioned labor laws, he mentioned land laws, he mentioned a couple of other items. All of those were constrained. Service exports actually helped you jump all of these. Straight away, Infosys was possibly the pioneer to start off some with body shopping. And gradually that body shopping kept on evolving, cost competitiveness kept on evolving from pure BPO to a KPO, and then complex KPOs and the likes of it, right? And as Rishi just explained, you have Uber, which is doing the entire mapping stuff in Hyderabad. You have tons of hundreds of names between Bangalore, Hyderabad, Chennai, Gurgaon, Pune, and a couple of other locations, where you have a lot of the guys doing very, very value-added stuff, right? So it all helped the country because you don't have to go through the land laws or the labor laws, or these are all pure white-collar worker kind of profiles. So this current euphoria around Make in India is actually you have startups, Ola Electric, right, which is into the Ola scooters. This was unthinkable till over 2-3 years back. All of this was around the management of information. That was all the services guys were doing, right? Now, that's no longer the case. We're talking about hard manufacturing. We're talking about electric scooters, electric cars, and a whole lot of other stuff, which is all radically new. Look at renewable energy. India has jumped leagues, right? Right from, if Tatas want to manufacture chips in India, that is something completely new. That does not mean, to answer the other part of the question, that if the government is selling public utilities or other stuff, it is to make them efficient. We just closed the transaction on Indian Airlines, Air India, right? Which has been sold to the Tatas. Now, what does that mean? It effectively means growth of the brand of Air India. It means, again, more jobs, stability, which was running into perpetual losses. Everything is going to come back into profitability. Otherwise, why would Tata want to invest 15,000 crores in this?
Yeah.
So you have, wherever we are talking about privatization, wherever we are talking about divestment, the focus is to make the asset sweat much more than what is sweating right now. And all of that translates into better productivity, employability, and the likes of it. So if you ask me, the roadmap is very clear from an improved job scenario for improved productivity of the assets. It could be human resources, it could be physical assets, and the likes of it. One last point before I want to hand it back to you. 7 years back, let's say 20 years back, when Prime Minister Vajpayee launched the famous Golden Quadrilateral project for roads, right? The momentum continued, and 2013-14 or thereabouts, average road construction per day was in the region of about 8 to 9 kilometers per day in the country, right? That today is 30 kilometers per day construction. So obviously, in pockets, land acquisition is being sorted out. All of this translates into jobs by the construction process going on. Everything will translate into better growth, decentralized manufacturing setup, and the likes of it.
Naresh?
Yeah, Gaurav, I want to comment on two things. One, building on what Sumit said in response to the question you had about what about existing firms. And second, I want to pick up on something Rishi said. So in the first part, I think Sumit sort of touched on it in his earlier comments, which is that existing firms, it's a K kind of scenario. Either they step up and then the whole India is a market and eventually world is a market, or they don't step up and then it's a slow or accelerated decline. So I think that's really the scenario. I think from a reform standpoint, the environment can be created, but ultimately you still have to do the job, right? So that would be my short answer to that question. I think I wanted to pick up on Rishi's comments and around the digital and how it all integrates together, right, around Make in India. One of the very interesting phenomena we've seen is how technology is empowering the less skilled people to participate in the new economy. I think the best example of that is Uber, right? Previously, if you were a taxi driver, right, your cost of acquiring the customer and how much you could charge for your service, right? You didn't really have much power into it, right? Uber suddenly puts you at a level playing field with supply and demand, with surge pricing and so on, with some back-end support in terms of helping you buy the car, the insurance and so on. Suddenly, someone who's not skilled, who doesn't understand technology, doesn't understand the word internet, is suddenly empowered to play a very different game. And I think the same phenomena we are starting to see in many other markets. I think Rishi mentioned about how the vernacular internet has really taken off, the non-English internet, right? So previously, if you were an agricultural producer, a farmer, right, you had no idea what the real value of your produce was, because somebody in my hometown in Aarti, right, bought the produce from the farmer, and then there were multiple layers before it got to the consumer, right? The farmer got a penny. But today the farmer understands a lot better with the simple apps that are available, the SMSs that come to them on a daily basis from different solutions, right? They know what the price in the market is, what kind of produce does better, what the weather pattern are. So suddenly that information, which is available to them on, in their hand, in a language that they understand, they can use that information to do better business. And the same thing we are seeing in dairy. So there are a number of technology-enabled startups in the dairy space who are doing who are trying to sort of reform and take out the leakage between the producer and the consumer, and so on and so forth. So I think that is the most one of the interesting things. I think Rishi touched on the bottoms up. I think that is one of the most interesting phenomena we are seeing in India, which is how technology is empowering the unskilled and the underprivileged to actually play in the new economy.
Yeah, just a quick reflection I thought I'd share in response to your question, Gaurav, is, the funny thing for me is, as an American and having worked for American companies, you're used to the atmospherically, at least, sort of trying to keep the government away out of your business, right? But I've counseled dozens of companies over the years coming to India. I give them the opposite advice. I say, run towards the government. The government is not merely waving a big stick and trying to regulate you. It is the role of the state. I think Sumit or Naresh mentioned, of course, the licensed Raj in India. It's still being dismantled. The role of the state in the Indian market is enormous. It is pervasive. It is, from a bully pulpit standpoint, I tell many of my CEOs, go seek the blessing of government institutions in India. Even if there's no ask, blessings help. Of course, many of these companies operate Airbnb, even Google and Twitter. When I was at Google a long time ago, the internet itself was nascent and unregulated. And so, of course, there's a regulatory conversation. But then there's there are collaborative conversations. Coursera is a great example. The government of India actually runs a competitive product to Coursera in India called Swayam. And so my point overall is that almost attitudinally, cultivating in everyone a sense that running two public institutions in India with a multi-pronged approach can pay dividends. And I think it's a real, the market is different in that respect vis-a-vis other markets I've operated in. And that's been fun for me because I do enjoy public-private stuff.
Yeah, so I'm mindful of time, so I just wanted to open up. Sorry, Sumit.
If you don't mind, I'll just give you one anecdotal example.
Please.
To actually clear up exactly what Rishi and Naresh have been mentioning, right? So last week I'd gone to a field trip from Mumbai to a place called Nasik, and from Nasik we went to meet a couple of grape exporters, which is a large industry in Nasik, and we figured out that these farmers use pesticides and agrochemicals as part of their cultivation. So we just walked into one of the agrochemicals guy, and we generally were asking him, is it, how do you sell your product? You have to, traditionally you guys have huge margins in your products. How does it work? He says, he was very candid. He said, sir, all those things are history now. So today the farmer comes to us with a mobile and shows us on YouTube, what does he want? He tells us, I need this particular product which is there on YouTube. Tell me how much of this for. And then he will not even buy. He will go to the other shop and then he'll show him the same YouTube channel there as well. And he will pick up YouTube in the vernacular Marathi language. So this is what possibly I want to endorse what Rishi was mentioning. The vernacular language utilization and usage is phenomenal, and people are accepting because it is adding to their bottom lines. It is no longer generally good to have. It is now becoming necessary to have. I rest my case. Carry on.
No. I think so. I've done my research also focuses around the impact of digitization across various sectors, and to add to that anecdote, I think I was going to some of the low income areas in Mumbai, and one of the things that really struck me when I was there was the fact of how WhatsApp was being used by women in the household to get businesses and use that to connect with other women in their low income areas. To then I have a huge order for 10 shirts, and then she will go and find her 10 women who can. So in such things that is, I completely agree with you. Like it's there on the ground, and hopefully as I think everyone agrees here is, it'll soon start showing up in the numbers and the way India moves forward in terms of productivity and GDP and income, and what its implications are for access, inequality along various dimensions, I think is an interesting conversation to have on its own. But let me open it up to the audience. We have about 15 minutes left, so I'm just mindful of time. And if the audience has any questions for the panelists, you can just raise your hands and I can call on you. I guess while we wait for people, in case, feel free to jump in, jump in the sense, raise your hands, and then I can call on you if you have questions in the audience. But Naresh, let me come back to you now from a more international perspective, right? You have been in China for many years, and you have seen, as we know, we know that the competitive edge of China, at least in terms of labor costs, is losing out. What is your perspective on, is that India's gain? Do you think India can really use that to our advantage?
For sure. And I, picking up on some of the comments I made earlier, I think China plus one was already an opportunity for many countries, right? And now with the sentiment with the US, China, India, China, number of other factors, even Europe, the narrative there, I think, China is at peak in terms of its share of exports, right? In terms of percentage, right? So I think from here, I don't see it going up. Right now, it's benefiting. In fact, the percentage exports today are higher than actually even when the tariff started. But there are other factors around, it's not so easy to move exports out and supply chain issues and so on. But I don't see the China's share of export rising from here. That opens up opportunity for a lot of countries, right? Vietnam, I think, has already benefited. It's already very hot. But Vietnam is a small country, 70 million people. And it's a young population. But Vietnam has its own market to feed. Indonesia has some of the same challenges, even more so, that Sumit alluded to and I spoke about earlier, right? So not much of an opportunity. Nigeria is too far back in its development. Pakistan is too far back. So there aren't that many large countries, actually. So I think, I truly believe that it's an opportunity for India to lose. I think India's had many chances, actually, to get its manufacturing up. I think this is probably the best opportunity India has had. But that doesn't mean that it automatically happens. And it also doesn't mean that India could be the new China, right? One, it doesn't happen because I think, again, Sumit touched on some of these things. Companies still have to work to build scale, have innovation in their products, make differentiated products, have the productivity, and then figure out how to open up markets. So they still have to do, the work in terms of building their businesses, right? But the other aspect is, I think what China was able to do, even before WTO in 2001, it actually all started, I would say, in the late 80s, early 90s. I think there was a confluence of factors. What China was able to do, I don't think is replicable. I don't think, if I'm going to go out on the limb and claim, make this assertion, I don't think we'll see another China. because there's a number of things happening. There was a wave towards globalization, right? There was a huge factor. So the technology was an enabler, right? Overall the freight costs, etc., was an enabler. So the number of things that are happening, right? And China benefited. I don't think today it's possible for another country, no matter as large as India or China, to possible to do that. I think India's share of the GDP exports can grow. India's manufacturing GDP can grow dramatically. But I don't think it can get to China's level in terms of what China was able to achieve until recently.
So, Larry and Darshan, I see your hands, but one last, I think, interesting chat message that I got, which is that coming back to students, we teach MBA students. There are lots of master's students doing their degrees in the US, right? And the question one always thinks about is, should we go back to India, right? And what should we think about in terms of prospects of going back to India? So just wanted like a quick 10-15-second thoughts that you guys might have, and then we can go to Larry and Darshan for their questions. But let me start with Sumit, Rishi, and then Naresh.
So my take on Gaurav, while India offers a fantastic opportunity, could be for jobs, I would presume for this generation, I guess entrepreneurship is an even better proposition. And there's an absolutely fantastic conducive environment for people to be innovative, people to try and do something different. And there's a huge amount of enablers which the government is bankrolling or red carpet rolling to try and allow people to experiment with that. And the good thing is any failure in their entrepreneurial ventures is today looked upon as an asset and not as a liability by future employers as well.
Yeah, I mean, I would say, I'm the weird one. I grew up in New York and lived all over the U.S. and then went to India a couple times just to learn and work. India for me is the land of big questions, big answers. And for me, I have developed lots of muscles around big questions, big answers, big creativity, big leadership, big insights. Because playing small ball in India, nobody notices it. There's too much going on there to be a busy bee. You have to think big, and I think that's why I'm grateful to have had a couple of expat experiences there. There are a wide range of online communities of entrepreneurs who are going back, who grew up in India and are going back and are supporting one another in their return. And so I do detect that in digital culture as well. Great question. Hope it was helpful.
I think it's a very difficult question, actually. And I don't think, like most difficult questions, there is no one right answer, right? And I think the answer really depends on, first and foremost, about know thyself, know yourself, what do you really want, right? I don't think it's a straightforward answer, right? I think there are opportunities everywhere. I fully agree with Sumit. I think this is the age of entrepreneurship. But entrepreneurship you can do anywhere as well. You can do it in India, you can do it in the US. So again, I think as far as the question around the geography comes, I think you have to ask the question as to what is the right answer for you, right? And I think there are two aspects to it. One is the professional one, right? So you have to think about what are the kind of professional opportunities, whether job or entrepreneurship, are there in whatever geographic market you're interested in. The question is on India, so in India. But then you also have to look at, how am I fit to actually leverage those? I mean, I'm sure everybody in their friend circle has people who say, I can never work in India. It's too complicated for me. Oh, I love working in India. It's so awesome. I know how to. So, you have to look at your personality, right? You have to see it's not an easy market, right? So you have to know how to navigate it, the place, right? So I think that's the professional one. Then there's the personal aspect, right? You have to look at, what do you desire in terms of, your personal experiences, right? India has a lot to offer. If you love traveling, if you want the richness of, historic places, diversity, etc. But at the same time, if you're going to live in a big city, there are going to be differences in terms of quality of life, right? So you have to take all of that into account. I mean, the adrenaline rush you get in India, it's unparalleled to most places in the world. It's, every day is awesome, right? But again, you have to think about the right answer. And I think that's where what I find, and I think this is hopefully helpful, I think what I find is listening to a lot of, stories helps one figure out what might be your story. And I'll give you, share briefly my story. From India, actually, Sumit and I were in high school together and in engineering school together in the same dorm, actually, right? So Sumit and I go back a long time. We sort of grown up together in a way, right? And he's always had a career in India. And I've actually started my career first in France, then Darden, then McKinsey, New York, then back to India, actually, for 5 years. and now in Hong Kong, right? And so much so that I got a green card in US, and then after moving to India, I gave up my green card, right? So I think I've been through a lot of different places, and I've come to realize that, and I've had fun every place. I think I've come to realize is that every place has a lot to offer. So instead of going for the stereotype answer on India is a great place to go, China is a great place to go, US is a great place, you have to find the answer for you. I mean, you'll find great examples everywhere of people doing well. So that'll be a long answer of basically saying,
that.
I don't know.
No, thank you for sharing. I mean, that's exactly, I think, the advice students look for, which is not a one silver bullet that is the answer to all your problems, but more about...
Typical Darden classroom, there is no right answer at the end.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, exactly. So, so Larry, thank you for being patient. I just wanted to, please go ahead.
Great. First, thank you to each of you who are on the panel and for this conference. This is a great topic. I'm excited about it. I visited India over 12 years prior to COVID, and I've been restricted and hope to return perhaps even as early as this summer. But the most exciting thing to me that happened was the institution of the GST and the creation of interstate commerce. There was a period of time where literally every time I was on a bus crossing a state line, we stopped and paid a tax. And if you can only imagine every good having that same element to it, it was why it was understandable to me that manufacturing couldn't excel. But now my curiosity is in the durable goods market. And I'm not talking about consumer electronics. I'm talking about the larger white goods market. In an economy that has been increasing and the demand that has been increasing for such goods in a domestic use, why aren't durable goods being produced in a much faster and greater rate in India and stopping kind of the constant need for import? Thanks.
Naresh, Sumit, Rishi, anyone?
Yes, sorry. So Larry, I towards the latter part of your question, I just got blank. The voice got.
I didn't hear either. The last line.
Yeah, can you repeat that?
Surely, I'm looking for ideas or thoughts as to why the durable goods production, manufacturing in India has not been escalating quickly, given how open the market is now.
So I can tell you the near-term future, Larry. There are variety of projects. One of the movement, I would use the word, is affordable housing, which has been building up very, very strongly. Affordable housing comes largely in tier 2 and tier 3 towns, or the suburbs of the metros, and it is spawning like a revolution, right? That's the number of units being created. Each such unit will indeed be capacitized with this consumer durable that you're referring to, washing machines, ACs, fans, and everything else around it. And with the consumer loans being available significantly, along with their credit track records available on bureaus, my sense is this market is going to be on fire for the next 5 years, at least, if not 10 years. The journey is just about starting.
Yeah, I can comment on this as well, because business I've been building actually has been in the durable space. I fully agree with Sumit. I think next, I would go out and say even 10 years are going to be amazing for durables. Why it hasn't been the case, Larry, is durables. Think of air conditioners, refrigerators, washing machines. This is a scale business, scale and capital, right? And capital not just in fixed capital, but also working capital, right? And guess what? Where, there are some structural advantages in China, right? Land, okay, you want 1 square kilometer, here you go. 9 months later, the building is ready, right? The roads are built so you can carry your goods out to the port immediately, right? All of that stuff, right? So government has been a huge enabler. The availability of very, very low cost financing, right? A favorable currency rate. All of that are such major structural factors for China that for the longest time, it's not easy. Even today, with 25% tariff to the US, guess where are still bulk of the air conditioners and washing machines and refrigerators and all that being made? Still China, right? Because those are really, really large, structural factors that you can't get away from. Now, is changing and it's moving. Vietnam is gaining some share, Thailand is gaining some share, Indonesia is getting some share, and India. Actually, for the first time, I was really stunned actually. There's actually a company, there are many now in the pipeline, but there's a company in India that went IPO as an OEM manufacturer, the like of Media and Greed. It's called Amber. And it's from my hometown actually. So they were just coincidental. And you would not see that in the past, but now I am totally with Sumit. I think that cycle has started, and I think it's going to accelerate.
Darshan,
Great, thanks.
Darshan, thanks for being patient. Yeah, go ahead.
Thank you. A quick question is that India has a culture of freebies, the state welfare schemes which work. There's a mentality where people also look forward for freebies, like, you need free delivery with your food. And whereas in US, there's this culture of, paying for even a smallest service. Like if a hotel is just removing your bag from the bus, you'll pay $1, and there's this tipping culture. And so do you think that culture will change in the country? And if the culture will change in the country, it will actually help entrepreneurs like me to step into the market and create premium products. Because if you want to create a B2C business right now, you need to have backing of an investor who's willing to burn for at least few years. And that is not the case with US.
So let me just respond to that one with something that you can verify, possibly you can relate to if you're coming from India. Let's take Ola cabs or Uber cabs or Zomato, which is an online food delivery platform. You look at the last 2 years pre-pandemic, or let's say 4 years, transition. The initial journey was all about attracting customers to use a mobile app-based service. You can call a cab, you can see where is the cab, you can see the map, the guy will not overcharge you. In fact, the company is happy to will give you discounts every now and then, and the likes of it. Over the last 4 years, actually all discounts have evaporated. They are no more in discounts. So, some of the food delivery apps have also reduced the freebies now, yet the demand is not slacking off. It's also a question of people getting people to use to newer processes or newer ways. So let me give you also an example of a famous cornflakes brand called Kellogg's. When Kellogg's came into India in 1992, or McDonald's came into India in 1995 or 6, as part of business model for the next decade or so, they were not wanting to make money. They wanted to change the habit of people to be able to consume cornflakes as against parathas, or have burgers as against samosas on the or chaat on the streets. As you look forward back in time, you can figure out McDonald's has also localized, Indianized the menus. Not too many places in the world that have done that. In fact, India was the first country they started to develop their own local menu here, which has now been exported to a couple of other countries. So the long and short is, frankly, there is a huge amount of adaptability. The market it's pure economics. Why would economics not work here? And the whole DBT program that the government is pushing in to reduce freebies on the fly, but to provide structured credit straight into the customer's account, I think all of this combined is going to be a huge success platform.
Rishi?
Yeah, I'll just say that I can't comment on whether the culture will change, consumer culture, that is. I guess one way to look at it is to lament it. Another way to look at it is to see it as an opportunity. The complexity of India, the complexity of the Indian consumer psyche, for me, presents an extraordinary opportunity to develop and hone marketing muscle, product muscle, leadership muscle, go-to-market muscle, regulatory muscle, brand muscle, influencer muscle that you will be grateful to have built. And I want to encourage folks on this call to not see these things. I really enjoyed what Naresh said earlier about India. For me, moving to India, my parents were like, "What are you doing? You're living in Silicon Valley, working for Google. Why would you go to India?" For me, the decision was personal. It was about intuition and not really clinical transaction. I want to go there and be a cool business kid. It was about, I intuited that it presented an opportunity for me to understand myself better and to grow personally as a human before overseeing something. And so there's another way to think about some of the complexities of India, and I've really enjoyed helping companies see that over the years.
Just a quick add, Darshan. I think that two parts to my comment. One is I think the cultural phenomena that you talked about is actually highly correlated with GDP per capita. As income levels rise, people want to pay more and more for services. The makeup of the GDP changes, right? Services become a bigger part. So I think India's GDP per capita is still actually quite low, despite all of the GDP growth. So I think that's just one factor. But the good news is the upper part of the pyramid in terms of GDP per capita is already up there. So that's point one. Second is I think India has always been a land of paradoxes, right? The same person who's driving whatever fancy car, right, when is getting their chart from a radio or whatever, will negotiate the price, or buying bananas or whatever, when then will go to the 5-star and easily pay hundreds of rupees in tip, right? Same individual, right? So suddenly what happened? So I think the answer there lies to, if you position yourself as a commodity player, they will haggle with you. But if you position yourself as a premium, right, and premium has a brand, think about psychological positioning, emotional positioning also as a premium. It's not just the features and the function, right? So think of that as well. So if your brand is positioned that way, where psychologically and emotionally is delivering some value, I would argue that you can charge a premium, call it service or whatever, right?
Great. So I think I'm mindful of time, and we're already 5 minutes over time. So I just wanted to thank Naresh, Rishi, Sumit for all the wonderful insights, and hopefully, I love the last part about just how to think about the country, and as young professionals, as students, when you think about planning, where you want to be and how you want to be. So thank you for sharing your thoughts on those as well. It was lovely to have you on the panel. Thanks again for making the time. And to the audience, thanks so much. It was a pleasure to moderate this. So I'll leave it to Chaitali to take it from here.
Thank you, Gaurav. Once again, thank you, Naresh, Rishi, and Sumit for joining us today. I think this was an incredible panel, and we were getting a lot of messages from people in the chat as well that they've been loving the interactions that we've had. Thank you again, and I'm sure that